September 11th, 2001. The day the world seemed to stop. Two airplanes crashed directly into the Twin Towers in New York. Smoke, fire, and thousands of lives were lost within just a few hours. It wasn't just a terrorist attack. It was an event that changed the course of the 21st century. Before the world knew his name, he was the quiet son of a billionaire construction family in Saudi Arabia. Yet within a few decades, that same man would become the most hunted person on Earth. How did Osama bin Laden transform from a privileged young man into the mastermind behind one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern history? From the battlefields of Afghanistan in the 1980s, to the creation of a shadowy network called al-Qaeda, to the catastrophic attacks of September 11, 2001 that changed global politics forever. His story is one of ideology, power, and the rise of modern global terrorism. For nearly 10 years, the United States and its allies searched relentlessly across mountains, deserts, and cities. Then, in the early hours of May 2, 2011, the hunt finally ended in a secret raid inside a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. But the bigger question remains. How did one man manage to reshape world history? And why do some still see him as a hero, while others remember him only as the face of terror? This is the story of Osama bin Laden. Most people know him as Osama bin Laden, but that wasn't the only way his name appeared. In Arabic, his name could also be written as Osama bin Laden, and during his lifetime, even Central Intelligence Agency files often referred to him as UBL. The name Osama itself has a powerful meaning. It comes from Usama ibn Zayd, a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, and the word Osama literally means lion. His full name followed a traditional Arabic naming system: Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden, meaning Osama, son of Muhammad, son of Awad, son of Laden. Here, bin or ibn simply means son of. In Arabic culture, people normally refer to him simply as Osama or Osama bin Laden. Calling him just bin Laden would actually be unusual because it is not a family surname in the Western sense. Yet in the West, the name bin Laden became the one the world remembered. Over time, he was known by many other titles as well: Sheikh Osama bin Laden, the Emir, the Prince, and even Abu Abdallah, a traditional Arabic kunya meaning father of Abdallah, named after his son. But there was also confusion surrounding his name. Some media outlets, including BBC News and The Washington Post, occasionally misspelled it as Obama bin Laden, mistakenly mixing it with the name of US President Barack Obama. The similarity in their names even fueled bizarre conspiracy theories. Yet, behind the variations, titles, and misunderstandings, one name would ultimately become synonymous with global terrorism: Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was born on 10 March 1957 in Riyadh. Despite it being generally accepted that his birthplace was Riyadh, which he himself claimed, FBI and Interpol documents formerly listed it as Jeddah. Mohammed bin Laden was born in Yemen. Osama's mother, Alia Danim, later Hamida al-Attas, was born in Syria. She was Mohammed's 10th wife. Osama was the 17th of Muhammad's 52 children and the only one of Muhammad's marriage to Ghanim. In the 1950s and 1960s, Mohammed bin Laden built a vast fortune through his construction empire, the Saudi Bin Laden Group. The company worked closely with powerful clients, including the Saudi royal family, the House of Saud, and the Jordanian royal family, the House of Hashim. Because of these relationships, the bin Laden family became one of the wealthiest and most influential families in Saudi Arabia. Even decades later, the company remained in the family's hands and maintained connections to the Saudi royal court. Born into this immense wealth was Osama bin Laden, who would later inherit an estimated $25 to $30 million from his family fortune. Just 6 months after he was born, his parents moved to the Saudi region of Hijaz, home to Islam's 2 holiest cities, Mecca and Medina. Osama would spend most of his childhood there, but his early family life was complicated. In 1960, his parents divorced. His mother later married Mohammed al-Attas, an employee of the Saudi bin Laden group. Together, they raised 4 children in a new household, alongside a young Osama. Then, tragedy struck. In 1967, Osama's father, Mohammed bin Laden, died in a plane crash in Saudi Arabia, leaving behind a massive fortune and a sprawling family. Despite the upheaval, Osama received an elite education. From 1968 to 1976, he attended the prestigious Al-Thagr Model School in Jeddah. In 1971, he briefly traveled to Oxford to study English. Later, he enrolled at King Abdul Aziz University, where he studied economics and business administration. Some sources claim he left before graduating, while others say he eventually earned a degree in civil engineering or public administration. But while many students focused on careers and ambition, Osama's main interest was something else: Islam. At university, he spent much of his time studying the Quran, discussing the concept of jihad, and participating in charity work. Yet, he also had more ordinary hobbies. He loved reading and writing poetry, he admired powerful black stallions, and he enjoyed playing association football, often as a center forward. He even supported the English football club Arsenal FC. Among the figures he reportedly admired were military commander Bernard Montgomery and French leader Charles de Gaulle. At the time, he was simply a wealthy young student from a powerful family. No one yet imagined how dramatically his life and the world would change. Bin Laden was raised into Sunni Islam, and he subscribed to the Athari school of Islamic theology, which interprets the Quran literally rather than figuratively. For religious reasons, he was against gambling, homosexuality, intoxicants, masturbation, music, premarital sex, and usury. He once wrote a letter to the American public, released posthumously, urging them to work with Barack Obama to prevent further climate change and save humanity from the greenhouse gas emissions that threaten its destiny. The latter secularist ideas were adopted by much of the Islamic world in the 20th century. Less Muslims were thus following Islamic morality-based social structures like Sharia, Islamic law, and this was condemned by the ideology of Islamism. In university, bin Laden read the works of multiple Islamists, including Abdallah Youssef Azam, his then teacher, Syed Qutb, and several Muslim Brotherhood leaders. Bin Laden promoted Islamism through his militant organization al-Qaeda, which has committed numerous terrorist attacks worldwide. Their attacks on the United States on 11 September 2001 led the threat of militant Islamic terrorism center stage in Middle Eastern politics. While bin Laden led al-Qaeda, it organized ideology classes that listed 4 principal enemies of Islam: Shia Islam, heretics of Islam, the US, and Israel. Bin Laden believed that the Islamic world was in crisis due to being influenced by these enemies, and that only the complete restoration of Sharia in Muslim countries would set things right. He rejected other types of government as possible solutions to this crisis, such as pan-Arabist, socialist, communist, and democratic systems. He once denounced democracy as a religion of ignorance that violates Islam by issuing man-made laws instead of those made by God. Journalist Max Rodenbeck wrote that bin Laden avoided theological justifications for democracy based on the notion that the will of the people must necessarily reflect the will of an all-knowing God. Bin Laden once also favorably compared Spain's democratic system to certain non-democracies in the Muslim world, praising both as allowing for their rulers to be held accountable by the law. In organizing terrorist attacks against the U.S., bin Laden was motivated by revenge for U.S. foreign policies in the Middle East that had killed and oppressed Muslims, particularly those that killed women and children. He believed violent jihad was needed to right such injustices. He also took the permanent stationing of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia as a provocation to all Muslims, interpreting Muhammad as having banned the permanent presence of infidels of Islam, or kafir, in Arabia. He issued a fatwa in 1996 declaring war against the U.S. for mainly this reason. In his 2002 letter to the American people, he called upon Americans to convert to Islam. Bin Laden did not unambiguously take responsibility for 9/11 until the 2004 video, but implied his motives for the attacks before then. In his 2002 letter, he described the 1948 formation of the State of Israel as a crime that must be erased. He viewed Israelites as kafir and condemned Israel for oppressing and killing Muslims in Palestine with American funding and arms. Bin Laden believed that the U.S. and United Kingdom were being directed by Israel to kill as many Muslims as possible in service of the Israeli state's goals. Israel, having already invaded multiple Muslim countries, was alleged to be striving towards Greater Israel by annexing the rest of the Middle East and enslaving the annexed population. In a video released in December 2001, he said, "It has become clear that the West in general and America in particular have an unspeakable hatred for Islam. It is the hatred of crusaders. Terrorism against America deserves to be praised because it was a response to injustice aimed at forcing America to stop its support for Israel, which kills our people." In his 2002 letter, multiple factors were implied to have motivated 9/11, including U.S. support of Israel against Lebanon during their occupation of southern Lebanon and against Palestinians during the Second Intifada, the Philippines against Muslim militants, Russia against Muslim militants, and India's oppression of Muslims in Kashmir. He also listed the former U.S.-led intervention against Muslim militants in Somalia, pollution caused by the U.S., and the U.S.'s refusal to ratify the Kyoto Protocol that planned to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Before 9/11, he believed that sending a message to the U.S. through attacks could ultimately deter its troops from targeting Muslims in the future. After 9/11, when the U.S. declared its war on terror and began hunting al-Qaeda members, bin Laden decided to try and lure the U.S. military into a long war of attrition in Muslim countries, while he would attract large numbers of jihadis that would never surrender. He predicted this would lead to the economic collapse of the U.S., as he said, by bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. He noted in 2004 that this essentially was how his soldiers had helped force the Soviet Union to retreat from Afghanistan at the end of the Soviet-Afghan War in 1989. In the 2001 video, bin Laden said, "It has become clear that the end of the United States is imminent, whether bin Laden or his followers are alive or dead, for the awakening of the Muslim Ummah has occurred. It is important to hit the economy, which is the base of its military power." In his 1996 fatwa, bin Laden mentioned that his war against the U.S. would not differentiate between dressed in military uniforms and civilians. They are all targets of this fatwa. Legal scholar Noah Feldman writes, "Since the United States is a democracy, all citizens bear responsibility for its government's actions, and civilians are therefore fair targets." Bin Laden also felt this was the case due to Americans paying taxes that fund their military. In contrast, he once stated that American democracy was the law of the rich and wealthy. In a 1998 interview with American journalist John Miller, he stated, "American history does not distinguish between civilians and military, not even women and children. They are the ones who used atomic bombs against Nagasaki. Can these bombs distinguish between infants and military? America does not have a religion that will prevent it from destroying all people. This is my message to the American people, to look for a serious government that looks out for their interests and does not attack others, their lands, or their honor. After 9/11, bin Laden claimed that the attack's targets were not women and children, saying Muhammad was against killing them. Instead, the main targets were the symbol of the United States, their economic and military power. Economic referred to the World Trade Center, a business complex in New York City, and military referred to the Pentagon, the headquarters of the Department of Defense in Virginia. In 2004, bin Laden said was inspired to target the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, 1 and 2 World Trade Center, as revenge for the destruction of towers in Beirut by US-backed Israeli troops in the siege of Beirut during the 1982 Lebanon War. God knows it did not cross our minds to attack the towers, but after the destroyed towers in Lebanon, it occurred to me to punish the unjust the same way, to destroy towers in America so it could taste some of what we are tasting, and to stop killing our children and women. Bin Laden was heavily anti-Semitic. He stated that most of the negative events that occurred in the world were the direct result of Jewish actions, and that Jews and Muslims could never get along, as war was inevitable between them. In his 2002 letter, he stated that Jews controlled American media outlets, politics, and economic institutions. The US and UK's governments were also alleged to be under their control, and he mentioned Operation Desert Fox as proof of this. Bin Laden once described the Jews in this supposed conspiracy as masters of usury, treachery. They will leave you nothing, either in this world or the next. He said in his 1998 interview, "So we tell the Americans as people, and we tell the mothers of soldiers and American mothers in general, that if they value their lives and the lives of their children, to find a nationalistic government that will look out for their interests and does not attack others, their lands, or their honor." In 1979, a major turning point arrived. The largely non-Muslim Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, a Muslim-majority nation. The Soviets supported the socialist government known as the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, which had come to power after a military coup in 1978. For many in the Muslim world, the invasion was seen as an attack on Islam itself. Among those who reacted with anger was a young Saudi student, Osama bin Laden. Leaving university behind, he traveled to Pakistan alongside Palestinian scholar Abdullah Yusuf Azzam. Using money and construction equipment from his family's company, the Saudi bin Laden Group, bin Laden began supporting the Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen. Years later, he would explain his motivation simply: "I felt outraged that an injustice had been committed against the people of Afghanistan." But the conflict was far bigger than one man. Between 1979 and 1992, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and China poured billions of dollars into the Afghan resistance. As part of a covert program known as Operation Cyclone, they sent weapons and funding to tens of thousands of fighters. The aid was funneled through Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, the powerful intelligence service of Pakistan. During this time, bin Laden became acquainted with Hamid Gul, a Pakistani general who led the ISI. Although the United States provided money and weapons to the resistance, the actual training of the fighters was carried out by the Pakistan Armed Forces and the ISI. Contrary to a common myth, the US did not directly train or fund bin Laden's personal followers. However, one unusual connection did exist. Bin Laden himself reportedly received training from Ali Mohammed, a former Egyptian soldier who later worked with United States Army Special Forces. According to Mohammed Yusuf, the head of ISI's Afghanistan operations at the time, Pakistan had a strict policy. American personnel were not allowed to directly fund, arm, or train the Mujahideen. Yet despite these restrictions, the war in Afghanistan would become the crucible where Osama bin Laden first stepped on to the global stage. And it was here that the foundations of a future global jihadist network began to take shape. By the early 1980s, Osama bin Laden had begun building important connections behind the scenes. According to some officers from the Central Intelligence Agency, bin Laden acted as a liaison between Afghan warlords and General Intelligence Presidency, the intelligence service of Saudi Arabia. Journalist Steve Kahl later wrote that while bin Laden was probably not a formal intelligence agent, it was clear that he maintained a significant relationship with Saudi intelligence. Then, in 1984, bin Laden took a decisive step. Together with Palestinian scholar Abdullah Yusuf Azzam, he founded an organization called Maktab al-Qadamat, often known as MAQ. The organization served as a gateway for the global jihad. Money, weapons, and volunteers from across the Arab world were funneled through MAQ to support the Afghan mujahideen fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Much of the funding came directly from bin Laden himself, drawn from the fortune he inherited from his wealthy family. The organization even paid for travel expenses, including plane tickets, allowing foreign fighters to reach the battlefield. But bin Laden was not only a financier, he also helped construct fortified cave complexes in Afghanistan's mountains, hiding places and defensive positions for the mujahideen. Between 1986 and 1987, he established his own base in eastern Afghanistan, commanding several dozen fighters under his direct leadership. It was here that he experienced combat for the first time. One of the most notable clashes occurred during the Battle of Jaji in 1987. Militarily, the battle had little impact on the broader war, but in the Arab media, it was portrayed as a heroic victory. Newspapers across the Middle East celebrated bin Laden as a courageous warrior. For many young Arabs watching from afar, he became a symbol of resistance. And during this period, his reputation and his influence began to grow rapidly. At the same time, bin Laden expanded his network by establishing training camps in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, just across the border in Pakistan. What began as a support network for a single war was slowly evolving into something far larger, something global. Bin Laden split from MAQ by 1988. This was largely due to him wanting the Arab fighters and the Afghan mujahideen to form a military force independent from the rest of the mujahideen, whereas Azzam wanted to integrate the groups. On 20 August 1988, notes were taken on a meeting involving bin Laden that indicate the existence of al-Qaeda. They mention an organized Islamic faction whose goal is to lift the word of God to make his religion victorious. Al-Qaeda may have been formed at an 11 August meeting between bin Laden, Azzam, and several senior leaders of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, EIJ, terrorist group, where it was agreed to combine bin Laden's money with the EIJ's experience and move the jihadist cause out of Afghanistan after the Soviets withdrew from the country. Other sources argue that al-Qaeda had already existed by 11 August. To keep al-Qaeda's existence a secret, the organization did not mention its name in its early public announcements. Bin Laden and Azzam also differed over the use of MAQ's military force following the Soviet withdrawal. They both wanted to use the force MAQ had built to defend any oppressed Muslims around the world. Then bin Laden publicly urged the soldiers to wage jihad through terrorism. Azzam issued a fatwa condemning this approach, saying Islamic law condemns the killing of women and children. Azzam was killed by a series of landmines in Pakistan in November 1989. It is unknown if bin Laden was involved. Bin Laden then took full control of MAQ, which was absorbed into al-Qaeda. He was then further radicalized by Ayman al-Zawahiri, leader of the EIJ terrorist group. After the Soviets withdrew in February 1989, bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was considered as a hero of jihad. He and his soldiers were thought to have brought down the mighty superpower of the Soviet Union. Bin Laden then engaged in opposition movements to the House of Saud while working for the Saudi bin Laden group. He offered to send al-Qaeda to overthrow the Soviet-aligned Yemeni Socialist Party, YSP, government in South Yemen, but was rebuffed by Prince Turki bin Faisal. He then tried to disrupt the Yemeni unification process by assassinating YSP leaders, but was halted by Saudi Interior Minister Prince Naif bin Abdulaziz after President Ali Abdullah Saleh complained to King Fahd. He was also angered by the internecine tribal fighting among the Afghans. However, he continued working with the GIP and the ISI. In March 1989, bin Laden commanded 800 Arab foreign fighters during the unsuccessful Battle of Jalalabad. He moved his men to immobilize the 7th Sarandoi Regiment, but this led to massive casualties. He funded the 1990 Afghan coup d'etat attempt led by radical communist general Shahnawaz Tanai. He also lobbied the Parliament of Pakistan to carry out an unsuccessful motion of no confidence against Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. The Iraqi invasion of Kuwait under Saddam Hussein on 2 August 1990 put Saudi Arabia and its royal House of Saud at risk. With Iraqi forces on the Saudi border, Saddam's appeal to pan-Arabism was potentially inciting internal dissent. 1 week after King Fahd agreed to U.S. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney's offer of American military assistance, bin Laden met with King Fahd and Saudi Defense Minister Sultan bin Abdulaziz, telling them not to depend on non-Muslim assistance from the U.S. and others, and offering to help defend Saudi Arabia with the Mujahideen force of his. Bin Laden's offer was denied, and the House of Saud invited 500,000 U.S. troops to enter Saudi territory. Bin Laden publicly denounced the Saudi deployment. He tried to convince the Saudi ulama to issue a fatwa condemning it, but senior clerics refused out of fear of repression. Bin Laden's continued criticism of the House of Saud led them to put him under house arrest, under which he remained until he was exiled from the country in 1991. After the war, the royals allowed U.S. troops to have a continuous presence there in Operation Southern Watch for the purpose of controlling airspace in Iraq. In the 1990s, al-Qaeda assisted jihadists financially and sometimes militarily in Algeria, Egypt, and Afghanistan. In 1992 or 1993, bin Laden sent an emissary, Qari el-Sayed, with 40,000 USD to Algeria to aid the local Islamists and urge them to go to war against the Algerian government rather than negotiate with them. Their advice was heeded. The resulting Algerian Civil War, 1992 to 2002, killed 44,000 to 200,000 people and ended with the Islamists surrendering to the government. In March or April 1992, bin Laden tried to de-escalate the civil war in Afghanistan by urging warlord Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to join other Mujahideen leaders in negotiating the creation of a coalition government, instead of Hekmatyar trying to conquer Kabul for himself. Bin Laden's expulsion from Saudi Arabia came after repeatedly criticizing the Saudi alliance with the U.S. He and his followers moved first to Afghanistan and then relocated to Sudan in a deal brokered by Ali Mohammed. Bin Laden established a new base for Mujahideen operations in Khartoum. He bought a house on Al-Mashtal Street in the affluent Al-Riyadh neighborhood and a retreat at Soba on the Blue Nile. He personally selected the bodyguards in his security detail, who carried Strela 2s, AK-47s, PK machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and Stinger missiles. Bin Laden heavily invested in various businesses, like in infrastructure and agriculture. He was popular with local people who considered him generous to the poor. He built roads in Sudan using the same bulldozers he had employed to construct mountain tracks in Afghanistan, and many of his laborers were former Afghan Mujahideen people. Bin Laden was also the Sudanese agent for the British aerial photography firm Hunting Surveys. He continued to criticize King Fahd, so in 1994, Fahd stripped him of his Saudi citizenship and persuaded the Bin Laden family to cut off his yearly stipend of $7 million USD. Around this time, bin Laden had associated more with EIJ, which then made up the core of al-Qaeda. In 1995, the EIJ attempted to assassinate the Egyptian president Hosni Mubarak. The attempt failed, and Sudan expelled the EIJ. On 8 November 1990, the FBI raided the New Jersey home of El Sayed Nozair, an associate of Ali Mohammed. They discovered copious evidence of terrorist plots, including plans to blow up skyscrapers in New York City. This was the earliest discovery of al-Qaeda terrorist plans outside of Muslim countries. In the early 1990s, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed became a top lieutenant of bin Laden and devised a plan, codenamed Bojinka, for a series of terrorist attacks by al-Qaeda targeting airliners. In the Bojinka plot, al-Qaeda and another group, Jamaya Islamiyah, planned for 11 planes departing Southeast Asia towards the U.S. to simultaneously be destroyed by bombs over the Pacific Ocean. Pope John Paul II would also be assassinated. The first known terrorist bombings organized by bin Laden were on 29 December 1992. Bombs were detonated at the Movenpick Hotel and Gold Mahur Hotel in Aden, Yemen, killing 2 civilians at the Gold Mahur. U.S. troops had been staying at the hotels while en route to Somalia to participate in Operation Restore Hope. In 1993, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ramzi Youssef, and a group of al-Qaeda members bombed the underground portion of the World Trade Center business complex in New York City, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. In 1994, Youssef rehearsed the Bojinka bombings by setting one off at a theater in Manila and the other on board Philippines Airlines Flight 434, which killed a passenger. In 1995, weeks before the planned attack date, the plot was foiled when Youssef's Manila apartment burned down. Investigating the fire, police found evidence incriminating him in it. Youssef was given life imprisonment in the U.S., while Mohammed continued working on his idea regarding hijacked airliners. By the mid-1990s, Osama bin Laden had established himself in Sudan, where his network continued to grow. But the situation quickly drew international attention. The United States Department of State accused Sudan of supporting international terrorism and alleged that bin Laden was operating terrorist training camps inside the country. Sudanese officials rejected the accusations. They argued that the political landscape had changed after Islamist leader Hassan al-Turabi began losing influence within the government. Sudan even attempted to rebuild diplomatic relations with the United States, but American officials refused to engage, despite Sudan eventually expelling bin Laden. It wasn't until the year 2000 that U.S. intelligence officials were finally authorized to visit the country. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, discussions about bin Laden's future were already underway. In late 1995, U.S. officials learned that Sudan was considering forcing him out. The U.S. ambassador to Sudan, Timothy Carney, encouraged Sudan to follow through, but there was a problem. No country seemed willing to accept him. Saudi Arabia, his homeland, refused to take him back, and at that time, no nation had issued a formal indictment against him. Later, Saudi official Fateh Erwa claimed that Sudan had even offered to hand bin Laden directly to the United States. However, the official 9/11 Commission report later concluded that there was no credible evidence supporting this claim. At the same time, U.S. intelligence was stepping up its surveillance. In January 1996, the Central Intelligence Agency created a special unit within its counterterrorism center called the Bin Laden Issue Station, better known by its codename, Alex Station. The unit was led by veteran intelligence officer Michael Scheuer. Using informants, surveillance teams, and signals intelligence, U.S. agents monitored bin Laden's daily activities in Sudan, photographing movements around his compound and tracking his network. Then, in 1996, Sudan finally forced him to leave. On May 18, 1996, bin Laden boarded a chartered flight and flew to Jalalabad in Afghanistan. The expulsion significantly weakened his organization. Millions of dollars belonging to al-Qaeda were left behind in Sudan. But the move also pushed him deeper into radical militancy. Several African intelligence officials later argued that once he arrived in Afghanistan, bin Laden had little choice but to fully commit himself to global jihad. Around 300 Arab fighters, often referred to as the Afghan Arabs, followed him there. Many of them would later become members of terrorist organizations. In Afghanistan, bin Laden found a powerful new ally. The militant group known as the Taliban had taken control of large parts of the country and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Its leader, Mullah Omar, soon formed a close alliance with bin Laden. To strengthen that relationship, bin Laden sent hundreds of his fighters to support Taliban military campaigns, including brutal operations in Mazar-e-Sharif, where thousands of Hazara people were killed. By the late 1990s, Afghanistan had become the new headquarters of al-Qaeda, and from this remote and war-torn country, bin Laden would soon begin planning attacks that would shock the entire world. In Afghanistan, al-Qaeda raised money from donors bin Laden had associated with during the Soviet-Afghan War and from the ISI to establish more training camps for Mujahideen fighters. Meanwhile, he effectively took over Ariana Afghanistan Airlines, which ferried Islamic militants, arms, cash, and opium through the United Arab Emirates and Pakistan, and provided false identifications to al-Qaeda members. Russian arms dealer Victor Bout helped run the airline, maintain planes, and load cargo. Michael Schur concluded that Ariana was being used as a terrorist taxi service. In mid-1997, the Northern Alliance threatened to overrun Jalalabad, causing bin Laden to abandon his Najim Jihad compound and move his operations south to Tarnak Farms. In August 1996, bin Laden issued a fatwa titled Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places, which was published by Al-Quds Al-Arabi, a UK newspaper. Saudi Arabia is sometimes called the land of the two holy mosques in reference to Mecca and Medina. Occupying the land referred to Operation Southern Watch. Bin Laden stated, "The evils of the Middle East arose from America's attempt to take over the region and from its support for Israel. Saudi Arabia had been turned into an American colony." On 23 February 1998, bin Laden issued another fatwa against the U.S., calling upon Muslims to attack the country and its allies. It was entitled Declaration of the World Islamic Front for Jihad Against the Jews and the Crusaders. After listing numerous acts of aggression committed by the U.S., such as the presence of American forces in the Arabian Peninsula, sanctions against Iraq, and the Israeli repression of Palestinians, at the fatwa's public announcement, attended by journalists, bin Laden said that North Americans are very easy targets and that you will see the results of this in a very short time. It also claimed the individual duty for every Muslim was to liberate from their grip Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem and the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. In November 1996, U.S. President Bill Clinton traveled to the Philippines for the annual APEC meetings. Bin Laden organized a plot to assassinate Clinton by bombing the presidential motorcade as it traveled through Manila. Before the motorcade left, however, U.S. intelligence agents intercepted a message between al-Qaeda agents about the plan and alerted the U.S. Secret Service. Clinton was unharmed, and the bomb was found planted under a bridge. Some researchers allege that bin Laden funded the Luxor massacre, the killing of 62 civilians at the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut in Egypt on 17 November 1997. The Swiss Federal Police later determined that bin Laden had financed the operation. On 16 March 1998, Libya issued the first official Interpol arrest warrant against bin Laden. He and 3 others were charged with killing Sylvan Becker, a counter-terrorism expert with the BFV, and his wife, Vera, in Libya on 10 March 1994. Bin Laden was still wanted by the Libyan government at the time of his death. He was also indicted by a grand jury in the U.S. on 8 June 1998 on charges of conspiracy to attack defense utilities of the U.S., and prosecutors further charged that bin Laden was the head of al-Qaeda and a major financer of Islamic fighters worldwide. Bin Laden and al-Zawahiri organized an al-Qaeda Congress on 24 June. On 7 August 1998, hundreds of people were killed in simultaneous truck bomb explosions at the U.S. embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. The attacks were linked to local members of the EIJ and brought bin Laden and al-Zawahiri to the attention of the U.S. public for the first time. Al-Qaeda later claimed responsibility for the bombings. Capturing bin Laden became an objective of the U.S. Reception to this initiative among U.S. officials was mixed before 9/11. In 2000, Paul Bremer stated he was in favor of it, while Robert Oakley criticized it. After 9/11, it was revealed that Clinton had authorized the CIA's Special Activities Division to apprehend bin Laden and bring him to the U.S. to stand trial for the bombings. If taking him alive was deemed impossible, then deadly force could be used. Clinton ordered a series of cruise missile strikes on bin Laden's al-Qaeda training camps in Sudan and Afghanistan on 20 August. They missed bin Laden by a few hours. On 4 November 1998, bin Laden was indicted by a U.S. federal grand jury in the Southern District Court of New York on charges relating to the embassy attacks. The evidence against him included courtroom testimony from former al-Qaeda members and records from a satellite phone purchased by bin Laden by al-Qaeda agent Ziad Khalil in the U.S. The Taliban responded to the indictments by saying they would not extradite him to the U.S., saying there was insufficient evidence presented by the court and that non-Muslim courts lacked standing to try Muslims. In December, the CIA reported to Clinton that al-Qaeda was preparing attacks in the U.S., including the training of personnel to hijack aircraft. On 7 June 1999, the FBI placed bin Laden on its 10 most wanted list. Clinton tried to convince the United Nations, UN, to impose sanctions on Afghanistan in an attempt to force the Taliban to extradite him. He was partially successful, as on 15 October 1999, the UN designated al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization, aiming to freeze assets and impose travel bans on them and their associates. However, the Taliban still did not extradite him. In late 1999, the CIA and Pakistani military intelligence prepared a team of approximately 60 Pakistani commandos to infiltrate Afghanistan to capture or kill bin Laden, but the plan was aborted upon the Pakistani coup d'etat in October. In 2000, foreign operatives working on behalf of the CIA had fired an RPG at a convoy of vehicles in which bin Laden was traveling through the mountains of Afghanistan, hitting one of the vehicles, but not the one he was in. On 11 September 2001, 19 al-Qaeda members hijacked 4 airliners departing the U.S. East Coast in an attempt to crash them into various national landmarks. 2 planes, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, were crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City, 1 and 2 World Trade Center, WTC, respectively. American Airlines Flight 77 was crashed into the Pentagon in Virginia. United Airlines Flight 93 did not reach its intended destination of Washington, D.C., as the plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after the other passengers tried to take back the cockpit from the hijackers. The Twin Towers eventually collapsed, destroying the World Trade Center. All of the hijackers and at least 2,977 victims died directly from the 4 hijackings. An estimated 25,000 people were injured. The destroyed site of the World Trade Center was nicknamed Ground Zero. Numerous people who were at the site during or after the attacks later received health issues resulting from inhalation exposure caused by breathing dust from the collapse. More than 6,000 people have died from 9/11-related diseases as of 2026. The New York City government initially told rescue workers at Ground Zero that the air was safe to breathe. The FBI considers their investigation into 9/11 Pent Bomb to be their largest criminal investigation ever. Other U.S. federal investigations included Operation Green Quest, the Joint Inquiry into Intelligence Community Activities, and the 9/11 Commission. After the attacks, numerous countries strengthened their anti-terrorism legislation. The U.S. Congress passed the Patriot Act, which expanded the powers of U.S. federal agencies to search and surveil criminal suspects. The NSA soon developed a widespread apparatus to surveil Americans' internet communications, regardless of if they were suspected for crimes. 3 U.S. federal agencies were founded to deter attacks like 9/11: the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Transportation Security Administration, TSA. Airport security was put under the TSA's operation, replacing the private security companies which were contracted by airlines. Extra security measures became mandated at airport security checkpoints. The U.S. also increased its collaboration with other countries on counter-terrorism, which led to a decrease in Islamic terrorism. In 1996, college students presented bin Laden a modified version of the Bojinka plot idea. In the U.S., al-Qaeda would hijack 10 airliners, crashing 9 into landmarks. On board the 10th, Mohammed and other hijackers would kill every adult male passenger, then land the plane at a U.S. airport. There, Mohammed would give a speech about U.S. foreign policy, and the women and children would be released unharmed. Bin Laden rejected the plan for its complexity, but years later approved him to work on a scaled-back version. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who had become bin Laden's deputy in 1998, convinced bin Laden to go through with the attacks and built the systematic organization that allowed al-Qaeda to enact them. In 1999, bin Laden, Mohammed, and Mohammed Atef designed the general plan for 9/11. They listed potential targets, including the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the U.S. Capitol, and the White House. They decided that if any of the hijackers could not reach their targets, they were to crash the plane. Bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders chose the hijackers in 2000. Around 20 men, including Mohammed Atta, were selected. Ramzi bin al-Shib was denied a U.S. visa, so there were ultimately 19. Bin al-Shib instead acted as a liaison between the hijackers and al-Qaeda's leadership during the preparations. In July 2001, al-Shib met Atta in Spain, and they made the final confirmation of the hijackers' targets. He told Atta that bin Laden wanted the attacks to happen as soon as possible. In the months before 9/11, U.S. intelligence agencies received numerous warnings about an incoming attack on the country by al-Qaeda. At the time, many of the agencies did not significantly cooperate with each other on investigations, so the government didn't piece these warnings together to make a cohesive picture of the upcoming attack. On July 10, 2001, FBI agent Kenneth Williams wrote the Phoenix Memo, a warning circulated within the FBI that bin Laden was sending his followers to Arizona for flight training. It was not seen by the agency's leadership until after the attacks. On August 6th, Bush received an intelligence report titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S." On May 2, 2011, Osama bin Laden was shot and killed at his compound in Abbottabad shortly after 1 a.m. PKT in a raid by a U.S. military Special Operations Unit. The raid, Operation Neptune Spear, was ordered by Obama that April and carried out in a CIA operation by a team of U.S. Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6, part of the Joint Special Operations Command. They were supported by CIA operatives on the ground. The raid was launched from Afghanistan. It was widely reported by the press that bin Laden was fatally wounded by Robert J. O'Neill. However, it has also been widely discredited by witnesses who claim that bin Laden was possibly already dead by the time O'Neill arrived, having been injured by an anonymous SEAL Team 6 member referred to under the pseudonym Red. According to Navy SEAL Matt Bissonette, bin Laden was struck by 2 suppressed shots to the side of the head from around 10 feet away after leaning out of his bedroom doorway to survey Bissonette and a point man. Once the Navy SEALs entered the bedroom, his body began convulsing, and Bissonette, along with another SEAL, responded by firing multiple shots into his chest. After the raid, reports at the time stated that U.S. forces had taken bin Laden's body to Afghanistan for positive identification, then buried it at sea in accordance with Islamic law within 24 hours of his death. Subsequent reporting has called this account into question, citing, for example, the absence of evidence that there was an imam aboard USS Carl Vinson where the burial was said to have taken place. Ayman al-Zawahiri succeeded bin Laden as emir of al-Qaeda in June, and al-Qaeda's affiliates through Asia and Africa swore allegiance to him. He served as emir until he was killed in 2022. On 15 June 2011, U.S. federal prosecutors officially dropped all criminal charges against bin Laden. In 2012, Pakistan released an intelligence report that detailed his movements while hiding in the country, based on interrogation of his 3 surviving wives. Bin Laden's popularity among Muslims peaked during the Iraq War, as opinion polls showed that about 50 to 60% of people in certain Muslim countries viewed him favorably. In those places, photos of him were often displayed in tribute at political demonstrations and speeches. In the West, bin Laden is overwhelmingly regarded as a terrorist and mass murderer. His New York Times obituary wrote that Americans generally viewed him as the main symbol of global terrorism and equivalent to Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin. Upon bin Laden's death, there were large celebrations outside the White House and in New York City. The Washington Post described the Arab world's reaction to it as muted. The Pew Research Center found that bin Laden had become discredited to his Arab supporters over the preceding years, causing his approval rating to decline. In Latin America, political leaders' views on his death varied. Its supporters included Peru's then leftist president, Alan Garcia, who labeled it the first miracle performed by John Paul II after being beatified the week prior. Others denounced the U.S. for violating Pakistani sovereignty to perform the raid. In India, the revelation of possible ties between bin Laden and Pakistan's government caused jubilation, as many residents felt it demonstrated a moral superiority of India over Pakistan, its historical adversary.